Hello, everybody. Thank you. As I see people beginning to join the session, we welcome you to Building Floodwise Communities from DC to Baltimore, which will feature Dennis Chestnut, Tyrah Cobb-Davis, and myself. I am Jamoni Overby. I serve as the co-chair for Taking Nature Black Conference. But also in my personal capacity, I serve as the DC conservation advocate with Nature Forward. And I'm so delighted for the opportunity to speak with some of my colleagues and friends in the environmental justice movement about our work in building floodwise communities. To start this session, I would love to thank our conference sponsors. Without any of your support, this would not be possible. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation, we appreciate you, and Montgomery Parks and Maryland National Capital Parking Planning Commission. We thank you for your support in allowing us to continue to have Taking Nature Black 2025 as the best conference ever, and many, many more to come. So as we get into the panel discussion, I just want to share that, as I already shared, that my work as a DC conservation advocate with Nature Forward is really going to inform this conversation. I would like to start with my panelists' bios and share a little bit more about my dear friends, Dennis and Tyrah. Dennis Chestnut is a native Washingtonian and lifetime resident of Ward 7. Dennis is a master carpenter and vocational educator by profession. His dedication to youth development, community improvement, and civic duty has led to his involvement with many civic and conservation projects. He has a passion for conservation and the environment and has advised many community, business, and government leaders on civic ecology and civic engagement issues. If you are in DC and you're involved with anything around climate, environment, or anything around Ward 7, you know Mr. Chestnut. Growing up in Ward 7, Dennis became connected to the many green spaces, parks, streams, and the Anacostia River, where he learned to swim as a child. Dennis is the retired founding executive director of Groundwork Anacostia River DC. Among the many programs and projects developed by Groundwork, the Green Team Program and the Green at Parkside, the Marvin Gaye Park Trail Connector, and the Bandalong litter trap stand out. Managing 4 litter traps resulted in the removal of tons of trash and floatable debris in the Anacostia River, becoming one of Groundwork's signature programs. Dennis is also a board member with East of the River Steel Band, Laos Brothers Sports Foundation, Friends of Kenilworth and Aquatic Gardens, where he chairs the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Dennis is also a founding board member of the Ward 7 Resilience Hub Community Coalition, where we have worked together. I am so honored to share space with Mr. Chestnut. Every single time we have a conversation, I learn so much more about myself, about the city, and all the amazing things that he has done in his work. So we thank you as being a pioneer in this space in DC. And I'm gonna go on to introduce Tyrah Cobb-Davis. Tyrah and I, we have met in the YPC Young Professionals of Color program for the Choose Clean Water Coalition, and we instantly connected. And I'm so excited to also share space with her today. Tyrah is currently a master's student at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Her research interests include environmental justice, social equity, stormwater management, urban forestry, and urban flooding. She is also the outreach manager at Baltimore Tree Trust, an organization that aims to get more trees planted in Baltimore City neighborhoods and public spaces. So we welcome you and we thank you for your time and commitment and dedication to the environmental justice movement and the Black community. So getting into the panel, I would love to ask you both, what is the story behind your passion for this work? And I can start with you, Mr. Chestnut.
Oh, okay. Well, great. And I'd like to say good morning to everyone and thank you all for joining this wonderful conference and supporting Nature Forward that does wonderful work. So I'm really honored to be here and be a part of this. What drove me, you heard a part of what drove me to this work in the introduction and my bio. And part of it is I grew up in this community in far northeast Ward 7, and I still live in this community. As a matter of fact, I still reside in my childhood home. So I'm thoroughly familiar with this neighborhood and this community. But this far northeast part of Ward 7 is, I think, one of the most natural parts of the city, has the longest shoreline of the Anacostia River and the largest tributary to the Anacostia River that runs through this part of the city. So all of those things, like really, I guess, made me kind of like a nature boy, so to speak. And growing up, I became I appreciated nature. I spent a lot of time out in it, in as a child and then growing up. But the real kicker for me was once I began to raise my family, started having children, and I noticed that the environment that I experienced growing up had taken on some changes tremendously, and it was trashed in a lot of places, and a number of things going on. So it really caused me to kind of re-engage in a way that got me involved with some of the work. So that's what drove me to the work. Once you get involved with doing this work, you're pulled in, you can't pull out. And it's one of those kind of things that just continues to keep you moving in a direction. So here I am, engaged with these wonderful people who I'm on this panel with, and also through the work. And that is what really has given me a passion for helping to try to make my community healthy and safe, and have a quality of life that is exemplary of the people who live here.
Thank you. And Tyra?
Yeah, so for me, I feel like there have been like a lot of motivations to get involved in this space and particularly in this work. I grew up loving nature, loving the outdoors. I just have always felt really comfortable in that space. That drove me ultimately to study environmental science in school. And I feel like since that, I've had a lot of really good formative like internships and experiences that led me to like the flooding space specifically. A few years back, I had an opportunity to be a Chesapeake Conservation Corps. Now the Chesapeake Conservation and Climate Corps, I always forget that extra C, where I learned all about like stormwater management, and just a little bit more about how communities can be impacted if that's not well taken care of. After that, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where I worked on an urban tree campaign. And it was honestly unrelated to my AmeriCorps term, but while we were there, the city had experienced like derecho storms, and a tornado had been there like prior to me moving there in the August of 2020, I'm pretty sure. But there was a time where it had rained, and I think it was like 7 or 8 inches of rain like fell in the city. And then I was activated as a volunteer to go gut these homes that had experienced flooding. And I don't know, it was such an impactful situation to make me want to learn more about flooding, climate resilience, because seeing people like go through that and lose their homes, due to like increased storms and flooding, really made me just interested in being in this space, specifically to learn more about how communities can, like become resilient in the face of climate change, because we're not entirely too sure how people, will be impacted by that. So that is specifically, I guess, what got me to that space. And I think that I've had a lot of like really cool experiences, but working within the stormwater space, and then on the tree planting campaign in Nashville brought me back to Maryland ultimately. Like I'm from here, but I was interested more so in learning about like are these instances impacting like my local community. And so yeah, that kind of brings me to where I am today. And I'm happy
Yes.
to be here and share the space with everyone.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you. And I think, pulling from both of your backgrounds and what you shared of what drew you to this space, it's definitely our lived experiences that inform our work. and inform how to do better and be better in that work. And getting a little bit more into what you've been doing and what you've been learning now that you've been back at Maryland and starting your degree, well, almost finishing your degree now at UMBC. Can you tell us a little bit more about your research and your work with Baltimore Tree Trust, and a little bit more about its relationship with flooding? Sometimes we think of flooding as just like a water issue, but there's so many parts within the environment that is intersectional, but also within the Black community that is intersectional, that makes it this perfect remedy for us to use different things to remedy what's going on in our community. So can you speak a little bit more to that, Tyrah?
For sure. So at Baltimore Tree Trust, yes, it's an organization that aims to get more trees planted. But I think when we think about trees in urban canopy, we can also think about climate resiliency, like on a larger scale. Not only do we plant trees in like empty tree wells, or we do a lot of street tree plantings in green spaces and things like that, but we also have the capacity to remove impervious surfaces. So that is like a connection to flood mitigation, because we're taking away, from those hard surfaces and replacing the concrete slabs with soil and ultimately a tree, if that is the direction that a resident goes in. And then specifically, my research, I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress, but it's been pretty exciting work. I'm looking at 311 data. And if you're not familiar with 311, of course, that is just a means for residents to submit various reports to local government officials, just to inform them of what's going on. And I'm making ultimately like looking at that data source and comparing it to rainfall data to see if there is a correlation. When thinking of flooding, it's not always just due to rain, although that could be a primary driver. There are so many different aspects that can contribute to what we know or what we think about when we consider flooding.
That's excellent. I will be on the lookout for your research. I know it's definitely still a work in progress, and good things take time, but I know how important it is that, those different systems of 311 are actually accessible and that we get responses within our communities. And I think with my different events that I've done with the Ward 7 Resilience Hub and at the Von Troy Center Resilience Hub incubator space, we've had conversations with different agencies in DC, including the agency that oversees 311 data. And we often see that there's not the same response time in certain communities, i.e. the Black community, as in other spaces and within the area. So I think all of those things draw certain parallels, and I'm looking forward to seeing more about that in your data. Yesterday, we heard from Akima Price, Prince Ham, LaShawn Johns, and Carol Gilmore about restorative park engagement. In conversations with Akima, myself, we've spoken about how parks are also resilience hubs. And Dr. Sheets also shared about resilience hubs and just this word about resilience hubs. And how does that relate to flooding, Mr. Chestnut? And I want you to break it down for us. What is a resilience hub? Share those key components of it, the modes that they operate in, and why are they important to us?
Sure.
And why are they important to us for flooding as well?
Absolutely. Well, a resilience hub is, and let's look at the term resilience. And it's very important to understand that resilience applies to a number of things. Basically, the ability to be able to sustain and with various kinds of disruptions and challenges of any kind. Just so happens that for our community, the priority challenge that we focused on was flooding, because that's, as you stated, the lived experience. We have that as a major issue. I'll get into that a little bit more as to why this community is prioritizes flooding. But a resilience hub is basically a space, a physical space, hopefully a community serving space that has the support and comfort level within a community where it can be that place of that resource for communication, for sharing and getting resources out to residents or connecting them with resources in the event of these kinds of disruptions, for education, for community outreach and engagement around these kinds of things. So it's basically that place that in the event of any kind of, and I use the term disruption, but disaster or disruption or emergency situation, it is the go-to for just getting guidance on what to do next. And during normal times, or what we would refer to as steady state or blue sky times, that's when a lot of the various kinds of programming can take place out of a community serving facility like a resilience hub, such as trainings and workshops talking about these specific topics like flooding or heat or any of the other kinds of disruptions that we may face. As a matter of fact, I think right now we're probably in a situation where, I mean, not just our community, but in the country where the importance of resilience hubs is really being clarified for us in a big way. Um, we are being faced with things that are driving people to figure out how to mutually support one another, how to garner resources that are going to be needed going forward. So some of these things we are moving into the unknown with, but at the same time, it is important that we have these kinds of resources and these places where we can build on those kinds of resources. So, as I said, basically, a resilience hubs are something is a place that can, in steady state, operate uh, normally by doing the things that I mentioned, but at the same time, in an emergency, in a disruptive situation, can go into a 24-hour operation mode and be that place. Not necessarily a shelter, but people can be directed to shelters or people can receive other information that is needed so that they can be directed to the resources they need. So, pretty much in a nutshell, that's kind of what a resilience hub serves as.
Thank you so much. And when I think of resilience hubs, I think us in the Black community, we have had our own different forms of resilience hubs, whether it was your neighbor's house that you went to every day after school, or it was, the corner store, or what Dr. Sheet spoke about, the man who had everything in this one little shop that was accessible to everybody in the community. And I think that's really what resilience hubs are about, is really about that mutual aid and coming together to really support each other. And I love that resilience hubs are not necessarily needed only in times of disaster or disruption, but they're definitely needed throughout steady state when people just need resources, and when our community needs each other, a way for us to pour in and for us to also take away from that cup as well when we need it. Dennis and I had the pleasure of working together on a project funded by DC Department of Energy and Environment in FEMA, entitled Rise Above, Building Floodwise Communities, which this panel is inspired by. And throughout this work, I mean, we learned so much. We interacted with over 900 DC residents in just 6 months. And we were really happy about the results. And it was such a beautiful thing for us to be prioritizing Ward 7, which is most vulnerable to flooding, but also looking into Ward 8. We engaged with all ages, including youth. And we're going to show you a little bit more about it. I want you to check out this video.
Flooding. It's the most common, costly, and life-threatening natural disaster in the U.S., And here in Washington, D.C., our communities along the Anacostia and Potomac rivers face some of the highest threats of flooding on the East Coast.
We know that our neighbors in Ward 7 are within the 100-year floodplain. So for them, the risk is astronomical on a regular basis.
In fact, 92% of all D.C. housing in the special flood hazard area, our highest risk flood zones, are in Ward 7 and 8.
When we get heavy rains, it flash floods, the waters will rise really quickly, will come over the banks into people's basements and houses.
These flood-prone neighborhoods are historically underserved, with residents lacking critical resources for protection. Nature Forward and trusted partners, Resilience Hub Community Coalition, Washington Interfaith Network, and the Green Scheme are working to change that. Our Floodwise Communities Initiative will work directly with people in D.C.'s most flood-prone neighborhoods in Wards 7 and 8 to build flood preparedness and resilience.
When the water rises, we're all vulnerable. Okay, so we want to have folks more informed.
It's been an outpour of just support from residents, and they were just so happy about this being a program that was accessible to them.
Nature Forward has a long tradition of working hand in hand with D.C. communities. Our approach is unique because we don't dictate solutions. We build them alongside residents and community partners to create lasting environmental solutions that truly serve community needs.
The Green Scheme has a Water Watchers program that we founded in collaboration with Nature Forward. The goal of that program was to preserve our water resources here in Washington, D.C. It initially was the Ward 8 Water Watchers, and we've expanded to be D.C. Water Watchers. Flood readiness is a piece that Nature Forward allowed us to incorporate into our programming to expand our water education for youth in Washington, D.C.
With your support, we'll expand this proven multi-generational approach that includes workshops, community events, green infrastructure, and emergency preparedness training to build stronger, more resilient neighborhoods across Washington, D.C.
This program really opened my eyes up to what it was that I need to protect myself, my home, and my family.
Information is powerful. So not only would I use the information for myself, but I would share it amongst the community.
With your support, we'll reach more individuals and families in underserved communities, ensuring everyone has the resources and knowledge to build a flood-resilient future.
Very good.
Yes. I love watching that video every single time. Something I wanted to highlight, Miss Mabel Blocker, who's also Mr. and Mrs. Chestnut's neighbor. She came to every single one of our workshops, even the ones that she came to. We kind of repeated some of the content in different areas and locations in the city, and she continued to come and be filled with the resources and the information. And I think what is so important about community engagement and climate education with our community is to make that information accessible, not get caught in all the jargon and the sciencey terminology, but really meeting people where they are. And I think that was something that was so beautiful about this project. You can see us walking along Nanny Helen Burroughs, which is an area that is very prone to flooding. And that was another way for us to make sure that we were reaching the community in an accessible way. After our workshops and speaking with them in kind of a lecture style, we decided to take it to the neighborhood and show them some of the things that they can do that were already around the neighborhood, such as stormwater management projects or planting a tree in your yard or elevating your appliances to help you be resilient towards flooding. So Dennis, is there anything you want to share about this project? What do you feel like made it so special?
Yeah, well, first of all, my hat's off to Nature Forward, because when I first, saw this opportunity, we were able to make contact with one another and move this proposal forward that really went heads and shoulders above what anything that I expected out of it. But a few of the things that were very significant in with this program was some of the information, especially that came out for residents, that clarified some things. For example, flood insurance, and there were a lot of residents who were taking for granted that that their homeowners insurance would take care of a flood event in the event. But because of this workshop, most of them really gained an understanding about flood insurance, the importance of it, and also got clear on what their homeowners insurance covered and what it didn't. They learned about the different kinds of flooding, as Tyra mentioned earlier. I mean, it all doesn't, it doesn't come from just rainfall or extreme storms. There's different kinds of flooding, which they learned about, but also um, uh, residents learned how to prepare themselves, their properties. They got exposed to programs within the city that some of them were not familiar with, such as the River Smart Homes program that, helps to provide various kinds of resources for their properties. And they also were able to find out how to respond in the event of an emergency, such as how to store your important documents and things of that nature, so that they won't get destroyed. Don't keep those things down in your basement, in a little box over in the corner. Have a place where that those things will be more safe, and in the right kinds of containers. Emergency kits. I mean, if you had to shelter in place because things outside of your home would not allow you to actually leave for whatever reason. The residents learned about how to build a kit that will be able to sustain them for at least up to 72 hours, and things of that nature. So all of these were very important things that I saw come out of this engagement with the residents. They also, a number of them signed up for a program that we work closely with the Fontroy Center, which is the Resilience Incubator, and that is the what's called the CERT program. That's the Citizen or Community Emergency Response Training. And it is a tremendous training. I recommend I recommend to everyone to try to get it if you haven't. It's actually a very important and life-saving kind of training that you can have.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, those resources are so important. And I think for a lot of the attendees, like, I want to go back to your point, the resilience hubs are not just for climate disasters. Sometimes we think of like the worst possible case scenario, and those are the things that I need these things for. But in our project, Xandra Chestnut, your wife, she also said, she would bring these large backpacks and it'll be like 4 or 5 or 6 of them, and show them on the table of all the materials that people can have. And she shared with you that she started collecting those materials to prepare for 9/11. And I think the visuals coupled with the storytelling, and everything a part of those workshops really created a perfect community engagement masterpiece, if you will. More into outreach and engagement, Tyra, I have like 2 questions for you. You are an outreach manager in your role at Baltimore Tree Trust. As a native of Prince George's County, Pretty Girl County, what practices do you consider and use to connect with residents that may have a different lived experience as you? So you might not experience flooding in your everyday, on your day-to-day, where you live, or you might, but in Baltimore, how does that kind of inform your work with the Baltimore Tree Trust?
For sure. So I think that it's important here that I am not a Baltimore native. I am from PG County. So showing up in the Baltimore space, I have to be sure to always go in, of course, with an open mind and not kind of like, push my agenda or the agenda of the organization to get more trees planted or to teach about flooding or things like that, because our experiences are so different. So I think it's especially important for me, essentially as an outsider. I do find community in Baltimore in a variety of different ways, but it is so important, to establish myself in a way that I'm more so like listening and just like learning from the residents in the communities in which we are working, because I don't really know what your experience is, and it might not even be like where we are in this given moment. I think in my role, you know, like doing a lot of outreach and engagement opportunities, it's provided really good experiences of like that deeper connection in learning like the motivations and just understanding like why and like understanding like certain things that are happening. It could be like from experiencing flooding where they grew up, or experiencing, I feel like I talk about trees a lot more than flooding per se, although everything is kind of interconnected. And it's like, okay, like the place in front of your home is so like it's like the perfect spot to get a tree planted. Like they're like, no. And it's like, okay, like I understand that and I want to respect that, but I am definitely interested in like understanding people's motivations of why, and just like learning, because I think that's really important. One, to give people the space to like share their experiences, and then also for me to like learn from that, as I'm continuing going through and doing my work. So let's see. So yeah, I would say like just when connecting with residents in my work, just going in with an open mind, and being sure that I meet people where they are. And then I feel like throughout the conversation today, just access to information and resources has been something that has come up, you know, quite often. So just in those spaces, in opportunities to share information, it's like a two-way street, you know, like I can learn from you and maybe you can learn from me as well. But at the end of the day, we have to, you know, show up and listen to each other and kind of gain from that experience.
Sure. In all of these engagement situations, and I think anytime we just share space with people, we are each other's educators and we are each other's students in every interaction that we have. I learned so much from our residents in Ward 7 throughout the course of the project. And many of them, like mentioned before, it's not that we don't know how to deal with different situations or disasters or things that are already impacting our communities. It's kind of that extra step of resources and those things that we need. So many people already, you know, had experience of flood before, knowing where they live. Yes, we foresaw that they would have experienced it before, but they also knew some of the steps that they could take to help mitigate that, or some of the steps they took after the fact. But then we were able to share some additional resources and in ways that, you know, government funding can help support you. And, you know, a lot of times I look at housing as another issue as it relates to flooding and other climate issues in my work personally. And sometimes you kind of have to flip the script and look at a different perspective. And it's not about flooding, it's not about your air quality, and kind of flip the perspective sometime and say, you know, this is a great opportunity for you to make upgrades on your home, or like kind of flipping that perspective of how this can be beneficial to you. You have to kind of, like you said, meet people where they are and what they might be looking for. Maybe somebody's a gardener, and just kind of looking at those things. And I think that's also a part of making those connections, is understanding what the needs are and finding that entry point for people to have their needs met. Yes. So I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about Baltimore and what you can share about the engagement and work being done in Baltimore surrounding flood resilience, including other organizations and resources that people might be interested in. And then I'll also pass that question over to Mr. Chestnut, who is way familiar about about Resilience Hub from DC to Baltimore.
For sure. I can share a little bit. I may not be the expert here, but just from being in this space, I have heard a lot of good work being done by the Department of Sustainability within the city. I know that the Department of Public Works, they have a lot of like efforts that go into like flood mitigation, and then also there's a series of resilience hubs throughout the city. In particular, I feel like the one that I always hear about is the Community Resilience Hub at Still Meadow Community Fellowship. And just from what I've heard and what I have just come across, I know that that was a result of flooding that took place in that particular area, but that's all I know. I know that there's a lot of good work happening, but I'm just not as familiar with that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I will say also, we became familiar. When I say we, as we started this process here in DC, to learn about and work with the community in starting a Resilience Hub. The Urban Sustainability Directors Network, we found which is, this is an international movement. Resilience hubs are not just local to our area or to our country. This is going on worldwide, and some places, of course, are very far ahead of us locally because they experience things that drive them to do that work. A lot of times, we are kind of cushioned and have a little cushion to some things being front and center for us because of the way things are. But I think that that may wind up being something that changes in the future. But as you mentioned, one of the things I'm glad that you mentioned is churches. And in Baltimore, Steel Metal Community Fellowship definitely is one of those. They started, I think, back in 2021. And there's also the First Mount Calvary Baptist Church that operates a hub, and and the Door. I'm not as familiar with that. That was one that was brought to my attention, but I'm really looking to find out more about those. And one of the things that's important to point out is that um, the Baltimore has something that we are going to work to establish here in DC as well, and they have what's called a hub and spoke network, wherein there are specific places that specialize in certain aspects of resiliency. Some may be focused more on food access. Some may be really serving a capacity, could serve in a capacity of a shelter in the event of some kind of disruption. But the main thing is that you look at it like a wheel. The hub is the center, and all of these various spokes all provide various resources in different parts of this resilience network. So, as we said, there's quite a bit to learn, and fortunately, Baltimore is just right up the road from us. So, I know the Resilience Hub Community Coalition is planning to do some visits up there and invite them also here to DC. As a matter of fact, they did come here on one occasion. We had a visitor from Baltimore when we were in the early parts of trying to find out what a Resilience Hub was ourselves. And but yeah, these will be some great field trips to take so that we can see how they operate, see their work in alive, and then when you think about it, um, when we talk about this metropolitan area, we're just a stone's throw from Baltimore, and we need to work a lot closer together because in the event of various disruptions of which we don't know what form they could come in, Baltimore may be one of those resources that we have to tap into and lean on as well. So it's quite a bit to learn, but Baltimore is definitely moving along with developing their resilience process. And the last thing I will mention also in reference to that is it's very important to be connected with the local municipal resources. And here in DC, the DC government, like the Department of Energy and Environment and the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity and some of those agencies, which are funded with our tax money, of course, uh, do work very closely with this process, and we really are glad to be able to connect those agencies and those resources to the community and the residents. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Chestnut. I love how, everybody's work informs everybody else's work, we can go on and continue to improve and learn from each other. Black communities all across the United States and, across the diaspora are honestly experiencing a lot of the same things. And some of us have figured it out. Some of us are working on figuring it out. And all of this work really informs each other, which is why spaces like this one is so important. Somebody might be out there trying to figure out how to start a resilience hub. I know our partners in Empower DC are trying to develop a resilience hub in Ward 5. And just finding those resources and bringing them to the community. And it is a long process when working with agencies and working with stakeholders, working with your community to making sure that you are bringing to them exactly what they need. So we commend the work that Baltimore is already doing in setting the foundation for us here in DC. And yesterday we spoke about, faith in action. And I just wanted to highlight that impact of the churches and those places that are already established, those communal places that are already established that we can kind of filter those resilience hubs into, and not trying to find a new space, but having those areas all around our community, which are already there. People already are connected well, and people have trust within those spaces as well, which is super important. Mm-hmm. Before we head to questions, I wanted to ask, what is something that you want people to take away from today related to building resilient communities against climate change or other disruptions, or engaging communities in the environmental and climate education? These are any of your takeaways, feel free to add them here, and really, share.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tyrah, would you like to go or
Sure. So I think maybe this has come up throughout the conversation, but I think a way to continuously build resilient communities in the face of climate change, of course, is providing the space for people to get together, maybe to learn. I know that you all were talking about the various workshops and things like that, but I think that in order to move forward, we just kind of have to stick together and then create those spaces, share resources, and things like that. Because in my experience, it's not that people aren't interested in being involved in the resiliency movement. It's just that maybe they don't know where to start. And there's definitely momentum and movement when people stick together.
Absolutely. Yes. And I'll follow up on that, and also something that Jamoni mentioned, and that is the churches. And think about the churches. One of the things that is important, they are community gathering spaces. They are a trusted space in communities as well. And one of the things that's important about churches, and this you can just think about this, most churches have built in certain resources. Most of them have kitchens that can operate in certain disruptive or emergency situations. So that means they have cooking facilities, they have refrigeration, and those are important aspects. But one of the things that we've been talking to some of the churches that we've interacted with is about ways that they can enhance their facilities by doing things like possibly adding alternative energy. Solar is one of those things that can help a facility like that go into a 24-hour mode in the event of an emergency. Also, backup power generation. Which is one of those things a lot, but they are commercial or facilities, and they definitely could benefit from backup power, whether that's battery power or some other kind of power generation. So it's really important that as you said, there's a lot of mutual learning that can take place, informing the community, because when we go into these various aspects of resiliency, we have to keep in mind that the majority of our time is spent in the steady state. When the sky is blue and the sun is shining, I used to hear a saying when I was doing that construction work out there. They say, "When do you fix the roof? You fix the roof when the sun is shining." So the blue sky aspect. And then there is the emergency preparedness part of it, where we really have to work to prepare the community for whatever disruption that is and the various forms that that take. And then there's the other aspect of our operation during a disruption, where we go into the response mode. And then the last aspect of that is recovery. And recovery is a key aspect. And as Jamoni mentioned earlier, it can include things such as wellness, mental health. You think about someone experiencing some kind of trauma. When in the recovery aspect, all of those things become very important. So as we look at our environment, we have to understand that there are various things that drive the climate and the weather, rather, that causes some of these kinds of disruptions. And it's very important for us to just make sure that we inform the community, meet them where they are, make sure that we tie them to the various resources that are available, and lock arms and be ready whenever we have to come together to do the things that we need to do to make sure that we our heads come out above water.
Yes, there's so much power in our togetherness and mutually aiding each other and just being there for one another. So thank you for sharing those takeaways. I'm going to now go to our questions from the audience. What tips do you have for linking climate resilience, community stewardship, and sustainable careers in urban environments?
Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and say, as I mentioned in the conversation, there's one program that we've connected to called CERT, CERT. That's Citizen or Community Emergency Response Training, which also can lead to not just personal survival or survival skills, but these are also everything that you do, has a kind of expanded or related aspect. So this is a opportunity or a possibility of turning those skills into careers. Tyrah mentioned the trees. The tree canopy, of course, definitely helps us to reduce our carbon footprint, which is one of those things that everyone needs to focus on what they can do to do that. But trees serve a number of purposes as it relates to flooding. The average tree can hold up to 70, 80 gallons of water. And so that also means that that's a flood, mitigation mechanism. So planting trees also, does so many other things. It's a place to get under and stay cool when the temperature outside is extremely hot. So, but we it's very important to engage the entire community so that we can determine the various needs and then move those needs into the various aspects of workforce development. For example, we have to distribute food. We have to do the things to help a household remediate some of the things that result from, say, for instance, flooding. So these are all aspects of things we can focus on.
Thank you. Tyrah, did you also want to answer? I can restate the question.
I feel like I feel like that was a really good answer.
Yeah, it was.
From Mr. Chestnut.
it kind of informed our next question, which is what are examples of preventative nature actions that should be taken to help reduce the negative impacts of flooding? So of course, trees. Were there any other preventative nature actions that you all would like to share?
Well, I'm currently in the urban forestry space, so of course I was going to highlight trees as well. But I don't think it just has to be limited to trees, like shrubbery, different like native plants and flowers, and just building upon that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very important point you're making, Tara, because there's something that is referred to as conservation landscaping. And I can remember, years back, one of the things that we did here in this community, we were getting a brand new library, and we were having the meetings to talk about what folks wanted in that library, and everybody was talking about computers and these kinds of things. And they looked at me kind of sideways when I made a recommendation that let's look at vegetating the roof of this building, an opportunity to demonstrate how a vegetated roof can not just benefit the library, but the community as well, and then the conservation landscaping that went on the outside of the building. And after it was installed, because that's stormwater control, that's a stormwater control mechanism. And after it was installed, I remember a couple of residents who came to me and said, Mr. Chestnut, why is that not, why did they put that instead of grass? It would look much better if we just had a grass surface. So it gave me the opportunity to explain that water runs off of grass almost as fast as it does off of an asphalt surface. And the purpose of that conservation landscaping is to provide where that stormwater or that rainfall can be absorbed and filtered into the stormwater system and recharge it and do all of those kind of things. But the conservation landscaping is one of those things that is important, whether we do it. I mean, it's recommended for people to even do it at their homes, on the schoolyards, the recreation centers, whatever. And yes, those are the shrubs, the plants, the various other kinds, other than just grass. I'm not a proponent of grass, except when it's used in place of artificial grass. I'm for natural grass, but not artificial. So I'll leave it at that.
I was waiting for you to say something about those microplastics.
Oh, those yes, yes, they had to
Yeah,
go.
I would definitely agree with conservation landscaping. And when I first started Nature Forward, my entry point to the environmental space was really through food security. So I learned so much about stormwater management. I learned a lot about permeable surfaces and the different impacts they have, the positive impacts they have. So to add to that, I'll share like something from one of our sessions that we had with residents. And it's not really a nature solution, but I think it's a personal solution. And we had these conversations about, litter and trash. And we have these systems in place, like stormwater management systems or not rain gardens, the trash traps to catch those things that go into before and have the drainage system. And I was speaking to residents and said, well, how many of you all litter? And most of them were honest. And that was something that they took away when I did the end of survey. They were like, well, I'm not going to litter anymore because I realized that it's clogging up the trash traps and, impacting that drainage and, causing that type of flooding within my neighborhood. So I think aside from those nature actions is really that personal accountability that we can have within ourselves, but also with our neighbors and, pick that up. Please pick that up.
No, absolutely.
The next question we have is, how has the federal funding cuts impacted environmental justice projects you know of or are involved in? Do you all have any, have you all been impacted, I guess, by the federal funding cuts as of lately?
Well, I will say that we work very closely. The Resilience Hub Community Coalition works with the pilot Resilience Hub that's been established at the F.H. Fauntleroy Community Center, and they are, as you described, the Resilience Hub incubator here in DC, first one. And one of the things that is we received a funding a grant from the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And that funding really was a 3-year grant that gave us the opportunity to really build out a number of things locally in the community. Well, of course, that funding also provided resources for us to be able to bring on a program person to help us coordinate some of the kinds of programming and engagement in the community. Those funds, of course, were very helpful. I look at federal funding and grant funding in general as like research and development resources. And we'll miss those. We haven't really at this point started to feel the impact of those funds, going away, but we will going forward. And but I think that more importantly, it is driving the local community to build its own capacity and for us to kind of refocus our attention locally and within the community to build that community capacity because we see how easily those kinds of federal resources that we have the least control of can go away. So I will say, yeah, we're looking at other ways of replenishing the potential of those funds going away. But at this point, it's wait and see. We haven't really seen the full impact of that, I think, at this point.
Yeah. Say Nature Forward and a lot of partners, we have, been impacted in different ways with pending grant applications and things that were already in play. But, even for this conference, we did have another representative we would have loved to share this panel with from FEMA that was able to come and share so much information, a wealth of knowledge on flood insurance, but was no longer able to attend. So we see those impacts every single day, and we are with our federal workers and our organizations. And I think that's another place where, mutual aid and organizing will be really important as we go on throughout this time. There we go. Okay. One more, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Okay, there it is. On the topic of community needs and building resilience hubs, has anyone conducted a community needs assessment in Washington, D.C. post-COVID, or have any resources they could direct us to?
Okay, well, here in Washington, D.C., as I said, the process that started with which eventually developed the pilot resilience hub started back in 2017. And so we've been at this process for quite a number of years. And there were various resources that came to the table. One of the primary ones is our local DC Department of Energy and Environment here in Washington, DC. And but they also had brought to the table other partners such as the Georgetown University Climate Center and also the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. So all of these are just aspects of various kinds of resources that helped us to establish ourselves. We started out as just a community working group called the Equity Advisory Group, and we developed through the process of seeing the direction of where we needed to go to build out things to be able to do more work, and that's where we are at this point. There, as I said, I would direct anyone who is interested in what their community can do. I would direct them to, of course, the Resilience Hub Community Coalition's website. That's the RHCC. So we'll have that information for you. And then I would say the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which has almost a primer on what it would take to start a resilience hub, because resilience hubs are not cookie cutter. They are specific to the characteristics of the community where they are established. And that's a very important thing to understand. So those resources are out there and available. And anyone who would like to reach out to RHCC, the Resilience Hub Community Coalition, we definitely would be able to help direct you to some resources to help along those lines.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question. And we were speaking about this a little bit before our session started. This question says, I am passionate about recreation as a form of resilience. Have you seen kayaking, boating, swimming, or water recreation incorporated into resilience hubs?
I would say absolutely. I ran an organization. I've been involved in this nonprofit work, and as you stated in bio, Groundwork Anacostia River, DC was the organization I ran for about a decade. And it was the organization that wound up managing those litter capturing devices that you're speaking of. It created a workforce development program for the young adults who were maintaining those litter capturing devices and removing all of that floatable debris, but also led to data collection that helped move legislation forward, such as the bag bill, the bag fee, that DC has been one of the leaders on, the styrofoam ban, and has even provided data that has recently the city, something that had been being worked on for decades, and that is a bottle bill has finally been passed. And so that was associated directly with those litter capture devices called band-along litter traps. The first one established in the whole Western Hemisphere was in Kenilworth Park in Watts Branch, right here in Washington, D.C. And now they are all over the United States. I think last I heard, there were somewhere in the range of about 30 litter traps installed, band-along litter traps in cities throughout the country. But also, yes, the kayaking, canoeing, those kinds of things are very important. And that's another reason why it's important for folks to learn how to swim. A lot of people have been apprehensive about even engaging in some of those kinds of activities because of their inability to swim. So those kinds of things do take place. And one of the things that I found out as a result of our work, and that is that we were able to connect with the Department of Parks and Recreation, and specifically a recreation center here in Ward 7 in Deanwood, that conducted kayak training right in the swimming pool within the recreation center, so that a person could learn how to get in and out of a kayak, how to flip it over, and all of these kind of things, but was able to do that right within the recreation center pool. So, but we definitely want to expand on all of these kinds of things. We would like to see kayak and canoe stations up and down the Anacostia River, where community members would have more access to these. And if they have the access, then they probably will use them more, and the other things that go along with it. So yes, absolutely. To answer your question in one word, yes, absolutely.
Did you want to add anything quickly, Tyrah?
No, I'm not as familiar specifically with the recreation aspect of the resiliency hubs.
Well, thank you both so much. I know Mr. Chestnut is also working. We're all working to have a swimmable Anacostia again, so we can't wait for us to actually take that dip again into the Anacostia. I want to say thank you to our speakers. Thank you to everybody who had questions and we weren't able to answer them. We'll try to get those answers to you some way, somehow. But we really appreciate your time and sharing this panel discussion with both Mr. Chestnut and Tyrah. We are now about to close this session, and we'll be on to lunch, to our lunch break. Our next session will begin at 1:10. I want to again thank you to the many nonprofits, universities, and businesses who help make this conference possible. They're the reason why, despite the losing federal funding, that we were able to continue with this conference. And we hope to be able to keep providing this beautiful space for years to come. So on this break, please check out our sponsors. Thank them by visiting their virtual booths, engage with them, their content, and check out the jobs board. We will return at 1:10, where we will have a private screening of the Hip Hop Caucus's Underwater Projects film. It is a beautiful film, and we will continue this discussion about water, our relationship with water, and resilience. Thank you all so much.